Welcome to the first of a series of videos to help you with the writing of your 8,000 word individual project. First video, as this title slide suggests, is designed to help you with the writing of the introduction to your report. The person that's reading your research report is going to have to read about 8,000 words. So when you introduce the ideas of the project to them, you want to engage them straight away. You want them to want to read on. You're going to need to identify why your particular research is important. What does it contribute to the field of research in the particular area that you have chosen to focus on? And finally, and unusually for an introduction, you're not going to reveal everything in this particular introduction to your research report. You actually do that in the abstract, where you discuss briefly the results and the outcomes of your research, but here you just set the scene, tell the reader what you're going to be doing, and save the results and the conclusions and all those things for the end. The abstract is something we'll cover in a separate video. So I'm suggesting that you opt for a 4 clearly defined paragraph structure, and that will ensure that you cover everything that an introduction to a research project ought to cover. Start with the general, this simple, clear description of your research problem. What was it that you were trying to find out? You might have had one main research question. You might have started with that question and then had some sub-questions that helped you to answer it. And those are the things that you include in this first general and introductory paragraph. The second paragraph is a bit more specific. You're going to explain to the reader what you will be doing in order to answer your research questions. In other words, what were the research methodologies that you chose to use, and what did you use them for? You might also suggest to the reader what you expected the results or conclusions to be. In other words, you may have had a hypothesis, or you may just have had a hunch about the direction and the results of the research. The place to put those things is in this second paragraph of your introduction, where you'll focus much more specifically on the design and carrying out of the research itself. Thirdly, you want to establish why your research project is significant. What were your reasons for doing the research in the first place? Often this will be related to a particular area of interest, an aspect of development that's going on in your own setting. Reasons other than that might be things to do with your own professional development. It might be to do with policies and practices in your setting. There are a whole host of reasons. You might have identified a real gap in the research. All of these reasons are completely valid and should be listed here, and they will hopefully help you to establish why the research is significant. What's it contributing to the field that you've chosen to study? Finally, give the reader an outline structure of each of the sections of your report. For each of those sections, you're going to explain its purpose, why is that section included in the first place, and then just give a general summary of what's going to be included in that section. Again, when you get to the section that may be called conclusion or conclusion and recommendations, don't give away that conclusion and those recommendations, but explain that that's what's going to be included in that section. Okay, let's actually take a look then at an introduction to a research project. Hopefully before you started watching this video, you've undertaken the previous activity, which asked you to look at a video clip from Strathclyde University and to consider some questions about how that particular issue might have been researched. This introduction is written based on the fact that there was a research project done in that area, and this is the introduction that perhaps might have been written as a result of that research project. So what you can see is that it begins with a statement that introduces the reader to the project focus. So we know straight away that we're talking about teaching in large groups. Okay, here in the second sentence we identify the general question. In other words, are large groups going to be positively affected by the introduction of those student response systems? So this sentence gives the general research problem that is going to be addressed. And then if we come down to here, you'll see these next 3 bullet points suggest the particular questions, the specific research questions that the project has set out to address. And here, just at the bottom and the end of the first paragraph, is an assumption that was made at the start of the project, which is that when students actively engage with their learning, there will be an increase in levels of motivation and achievement. So the first paragraph does exactly what it says. It is a general introduction to the project itself, and the particular research questions that are going to be dealt with are identified in that first paragraph. So now we come to the specific, and you'll see here that the second paragraph begins with an introduction to what's going to happen in terms of trying to answer those questions. We're explaining what the project is going to do, and you'll see that it identifies here the data and who the data is provided by, and the department that it's provided by, and this particular time when these student response systems were introduced. Further on down, we find out that the students were introduced to these response systems because the teaching staff believed they would encourage the active participation of students. So here's that specific thing, the kind of hypothesis, if you like, of what the people doing the research expected to be the result of the project. Okay, and then down here, just to end this paragraph, we find the particular research methods that were going to be used in order to carry out the project. So we've got some real specifics here that take us from the general question to the particular approach that was taken to the research. Who was involved, what was they expecting to find out, and what particular methods were used in order to find out that information. Now, if you remember, the third paragraph we suggested should identify the significance of the research that you've undertaken. And this is quite interesting because here is a general rationale for doing this research in the first place. In other words, it was clear to the people doing the research that large groups have been a feature of university education for a long time, and that actually because of current funding constraints, it's likely that large groups will continue to be a feature of university teaching. So we need to know how to do it well. And as a result, this research is significant because it tries to find a way to make that kind of teaching effective for students. Specifically, the research identifies an area where there has been less attention paid in terms of teaching large groups, and that is the focus of this particular research and where it can make its own unique contribution. So what we've got here is a general significance and a specific area of significance that this research has tried to address. Finally, we get our map through the essay. So first of all, we have the project begins. That's the literature research that begins the project after the introduction. So your literature review, the first chapter of your research project, and it explains what this literature review was trying to achieve. Then it introduces chapter 2, and this is the methodology section. So this particular part of this paragraph explains what's contained in that chapter and highlights the fact that it's not just about the methodology, but also the ethical considerations that were taken into account as well. And then we're introduced to chapter 3, the results of the project, and it talks about the way that the data gathered helped the researcher to answer their research questions. And as a result of looking at that data, you'll notice that this chapter also begins to draw some potential conclusions about the effective practice of using student response systems. And then the final chapter to the project considers what is significant about these findings. So it's going back to that general issue of teaching large groups in university and making some recommendations about further study based on what has been learned as part of this particular project. So that map gives the reader a really clear overview of what's going on in this project and how it's going to be unpacked through the various chapters that have been included in the project. And finally, just note the word count. 535 words, that's about right for the introduction to a research project report of this length. If you're aiming about the 500 word mark, then you're probably covering what needs to be covered. So I'm recommending that you aim for this particular structure. You aim to engage the reader through your introduction so that they want to read on, and that you aim for a word count of around the 500 words mark to make sure that you have covered in that introduction what's necessary to really set the ground for an effective research report. Thanks for listening.